My name is Ron Hill. I'm with RightStar Systems, a solutions consultant here at RightStar Systems, and I just want to welcome everyone to today's 30-minute webinar. And today's topic is Better Change Management through BMC FootPrints. So obviously we're going to be taking a look at how the change management module and change management functionality within FootPrints will hopefully better your organization and better your IT service management delivery. So before we get into a product demonstration, I will just spend a few minutes on a few slides. But before I get into that, most of you know who RightStar is, but for those of you that maybe don't, just a real quick introduction. RightStar is an IT consultancy firm specializing in BMC products. So not only do we support the BMC FootPrints product, but as well Remedy Force and then the Remedy Enterprise solution. So if you have interest in those solutions or have counterparts that maybe are focused in those areas, feel free, be on the lookout for invitations for that. But again, today we're primarily focusing on the FootPrints application. So with that, let's get started. So what is the purpose of change management? You can see here, this is a summarization that is provided through the alignability process model, which we're going to talk a little bit about here in a moment. But the purpose here of change management is to implement required changes with minimum impact to our customers, in doing so in the most cost-effective manner. And that's ultimately what we're trying to accomplish with change management. Now, this, you probably, if you're familiar with the ITIL framework, you may see some objectives and some statements that vary a little bit from this, but at the end of the day, we're trying to implement the required changes. So we're not making changes just to make changes. We're doing it for a purpose and a reason. And so we're trying to do that with the least amount of impact to the customer. And so how do we go about doing that? Well, one of the things that I've always told customers is that this whole thing that we refer to as IT service management, it's 80% process, 20% technology if you follow the 80-20 rule. And so BMC has certainly given us a very flexible solution that we can customize and configure to support and automate the process, but we really have to have those processes up front. And so I've tried to be a little bit humorous here. And so why do we need a formal change management process? Well, if we don't, some very interesting things can happen. And so on a personal level, it may not be quite this severe, but the point is that if you don't have a good process in place, things certainly start to go awry. And so it is important that we think about the process that we're implementing, and we run simulations against that process to make sure that we get the outcomes necessary. And so from an IT perspective, this is actually a screenshot from a live, or what I guess attempted to be a live website, but a couple of years ago there was a news announcement about airlines, and I'll leave the name unmentioned, but an airlines that basically they had an outage and customers couldn't go to their website because they had implemented some changes, and basically they didn't do a good enough job testing and preparing for that change, because certainly customers were impacted. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to avoid. In this particular scenario, this was certainly revenue impacting. Not all situations will be at least directly impacting revenue, but at the end of the day, if you have an application or a service that your employees are dependent upon and they can't access that for one reason or another, yes, it may not be directly linked to reduce sales, but certainly there's a cost associated with that. And so it is absolutely critical that we think about our changes and, more importantly, have a good process in place to support those changes. So real quickly, how can FootPrints help with your change process? Well, I've just captured a few things, and again, this discussion, I mean, literally you could go a half a day on this topic alone, so by no means this is intended to go in that much detail. We just want to give you hopefully a few seeds of wisdom and knowledge so that you can take that back and better improve your change management process or improve your change management implementation. So how are ways that FootPrints can help in that regard? Well, first of all, better communication, and better communication not only for your staff members that might be implementing the change or that have to support the changes, but also to your customers. It's that whole adage of setting expectations with your customers, letting them know that this is something that's happening. Not only that, but these changes that you might be implementing might be a result of their request for change, right? So if customers are asking for these changes, it's important to not only notify them that a change has occurred, but that you're considering or that you have rejected their request for change. So better communication for customer and staff, and that can be done in an automated fashion or through other mechanisms. Also, we want to reduce failures that are a result of changes. So this is basically talking to the point of increasing or bettering your quality of service that you deliver to your customers. My father always had a saying growing up that a good carpenter will always measure twice and cut once. And so I apply that to the IT world, and that really means make sure that you're doing the proper risk and impact analysis, making sure that the change is planned adequately and it's in line with what your business, the business that you're supporting needs. So we're going to talk about and see some ways that we can do that. Also, regulatory compliance. So some of you may be, if you're in retail, you have things like PCI that you have to be account for. If you're in a healthcare environment, you have HIPAA regulations, and one of the things that any of these regulatory agencies and regulatory groups are going to want to see is that, one, do you have a change process? And then, two, are you following that on a consistent and regular basis? And three, what are the negative outcomes to changes that you might be making, and are you looking at ways that you can improve that? So here again, these are some things that FootPrints can help with in terms of allowing you to define templates so that if you have a change process, that it is something that is implemented and followed on a regular basis. Another area, we've alluded to this and have mentioned it a few times thus far, is the fact that it is important to have a standard process. And working with many different organizations, I often find that this is one of the things that is most challenging for organizations, is that having that documented process that they can follow and at least have some guidance on where to start. So there's certainly components to FootPrints that will help in that regard as well. So with that, I don't want to spend any more time in a PowerPoint. What I'd like to do is just jump over to the application and let's take a look at the product. I should also add today everyone is on mute, but certainly if you have questions, I encourage you to ask those questions in the Q&A portion of WebEx. So you should be able to type in your question. I am going to save some time towards the end, and you absolutely can post your questions there, and try to do that in the Q&A, not the chat box. That way we can capture those, and we'll also post those responses as well after the presentation. So with that, let's move out of the PowerPoint. So we're now taking a look at FootPrints. This is the most current version of FootPrints for those of you that maybe are on some older versions. But immediately when we log in, we have access to these widgets here on the home page of the Change Management Workspace. And so these widgets are designed, you can certainly configure these to make information and data that's relevant to the user. And so one of the things I really try to think about when we're determining what content we want here is what's going to bring the most value, and what are our KPIs, and is there data that helps me measure against those KPIs? So, for example, here we're looking at active requests for changes, and specifically we can see the workflow that the change is following. And we have two workflows in this particular implementation. We have a normal change process and an emergency change process. So these are key performance indicators. As typically you think of an organization that is more chaotic, there would typically be more emergency changes than your standard or normal changes in that environment. So that's just one of the things that I kind of always look at when I'm going into an organization is what is the typical, what's the run rate of emergency changes versus your standard changes, and why is that the reason behind that? So again, these widgets and widgets can certainly be useful, but before I get into that, something that maybe not all customers are aware of, and that is this feature that we refer to as the alignability process model. So I just accessed that from the toolbar. But the alignability process model, it is a set of comprehensive idle-based processes that were originally developed well over 15 years ago and have evolved from implementation to implementation. They were not product specific, so these were not processes that were designed explicitly for FootPrints or Remedy for that matter. It actually started off being designed for HP implementations, but BMC acquired the alignability process model about a little over 5 years ago now, and with that, they saw this as a great tool to give customers a process that they can start with, and most importantly, even provide pre-configured implementations of FootPrints or whatever the product may be. So what you're seeing here is a comprehensive set of processes, and if we delve into the change management process, you can see some of the details. So we have a number of documentation links that are made available to you here. But in general, we have a change registration process where we're going to register that change. And if you'll notice, these changes are most commonly initiated from our incidents or service requests. In addition to that, they may come from problem management.